I'm Dave Greenwood, and this is Overcoming Distractions. If you are an adult with ADHD, a busy professional, an entrepreneur, a high achiever, or just need some strategies to navigate your adult ADHD, you're in the right place. Who am I? I'm an entrepreneur with ADHD and the author of 2 books, Overcoming Distractions and Overcoming Burnout. I coach and mentor people just like you, and together we navigate the ups and downs of adult ADHD. From getting out of our own way to helping people just like you thrive in the workplace. That's what I do. Want more info on working with me? Hit overcomingdistractions.com. Ready? Let's get to today's podcast. All right, all my distracted friends, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, you know who you are. You're on Overcoming Distractions. Thanks for hitting that download button. And I'm not going to waste any time doing anything because this is a conversation about perfectionism. And I know you saw it, and I know you just had to download it absolutely immediately because it is, as they say over here, the kind of 800-pound gorilla in the ADHD room, right? So we're gonna dig right in. I will say I learned a valuable lesson after my son was born. And, I'd walk around the mall, or my wife and I would go out somewhere, and I used to wonder why people would go out looking so rough, when they're pushing the baby carriage. And I was watching parents with food on their shirt, and I admit maybe I didn't look down at it, but I'm like, how did that person go out of the house with all that food on their shirt? And then my son was born. And I learned not to be perfect anymore in some areas because I was walking around the mall with food on my shirt and God knows what else on me. So that was my epiphany in the world of perfectionism, and realizing that we don't have to be perfect. And I think many of us struggle to some extent with perfectionism. And I know that those of us with ADHD some of us bring that to a whole new level. Not all of us, but some of us do. But let's make one thing clear, as I talk about with other things, such as procrastination and other things, is those of us with ADHD, we don't own perfectionism. Many types of people struggle with it. And I can tell you from my past experience, mostly professional, that I probably could have launched a project much sooner if I didn't have everything absolutely perfect and lined up in rows and everything else. And but I also think perfectionism goes deeper. It goes deeper than just the kind of work we're cranking out for our jobs or our clients. Let's take social media, which is a whole nother conversation that is just breeding ground for us wanting to be perfect. So as you can see, as you know, the area of perfectionism is all over the place. So who better to talk about perfectionism than the author of The Perfectionist Dilemma, Dr. Tara Cousineau. I got your name right this time, right?
Got the second part right. Yeah. But you're such a Bostonian. It's Tara. But so many people say Tara.
What did I say, Tara?
Yeah. Okay.
We're both from Boston.
Tara, so no, it's fine. Listen, whatever people want to call me, it's fine. You should see what ends up on the Starbucks card sometimes. It's like, Kevin? I'm like, how did you get that?
Well, this is a great segue into perfectionism, right? This
Yes.
is like I screw things up daily here. So
well, and I learned to let things go, so
see, there you go. You could have said, Dave, stop, edit that.
Yeah.
So, but we don't edit here, and you know that from past experiences. So that is just a great example of this is the real world. This people ask me, Dave, you're going to edit the podcast? I'm like, nope, not unless like a Mack truck drives through your office. What you hear is what you get. You get the real world here. So, and I learned that because there's a lot of podcasters I've met over the years, and they go, I just spent 5 hours editing my podcast, all the ums and the ahs and everything else. I'm like,
I get paranoid about all the ums and the you knows. Like apparently my husband told me it's like your filler is I'm like, oh, it is.
There's a review on Apple Podcasts saying the podcast is great if the guy could just stop saying
So now I'm going to be very mindful during this conversation.
I should have a post-it on my monitor here, and just put like a big red X through it. So you're also the author of The Kindness Cure. We've talked about that before. Being kind to ourselves. That was a great conversation. So people, um, if you want to go back and find that episode, I think I think we did that last year. So you trained at Harvard Medical School. You were a part-time staff psychologist at Harvard University. Still,
Yes,
yeah,
at the
okay.
counseling center there.
Counseling center. All right. So congrats on the new book. It's much needed in this community, the ADHD world. Um, you wrote about kindness. What made you transition, or maybe it's not a transition, maybe it's it's part two of the kindness, but um, what made you decide to write a book about perfectionism?
Yeah, Dave, thanks for that question. I mean, I'm a perfectionist, so I'm just going to be really upfront. I was raised by a perfectionist. My mother is German. I couldn't leave the house unless everything was absolutely neat and tidy. We always looked like we were the perfect family when in fact it was complete chaos if you actually walked
Yeah,
into our house. So I grew up with a lot of anxiety and that's just my backdrop. But I became a therapist in part to, you know, you teach what you must learn in a way. So I've been a therapist for 25 years. And perfectionism was, this is how I look at it, is perfectionism is protection. And it doesn't matter, if you have neurodiversity, if you've had a tragic background, if there's been trauma, or if you had a great life. People cultivate perfectionism as a way to protect themselves, and it's not conscious. It's like, oh, if I
yeah.
just do this right, if I don't make any mistakes, I won't get in trouble. So it's a conditioning that happens and it becomes a strategy in life to move forward, and it can be very effective for a long time until it's not.
Until it's not, yeah. So So can we, because I love to break things down here, I always want somebody to, I want them to have fun and enjoy listening to us, but I also want them to learn something and be able to walk away with something they might be able to implement in their lives. And that's the way I try to structure these conversations. But do you define perfectionism in the book?
I do.
Yeah. So can you kind of give people the definition of perfectionism so they can get a better understanding of, or maybe they can relate to it?
Yeah, I have cultivated a holistic definition of perfectionism. I mean, there's research definitions, and I'm happy to give those as well. But I really see perfectionism as the paradox created by the need for belonging or the fear of rejection, however you want to look at it,
Yeah.
paired with unrealistic expectations for achievement and approval that sap your energy or life force. So I really wanted to put in the energy piece because people who struggle with perfectionism, when it's sort of hit a tipping point that it's no longer effective for them, it will lead to burnout, which is one of your topics.
Yeah.
But I really see it from an energetic perspective, both physical and metaphysical. So I really wanted to write a book based on many workshops that I do at Harvard University with young adults, early career professionals, mid-career professionals. I kind of get the gamut really between 18 and 45 that are going to school or back to school for some reason, some sort of self-improvement, obviously. And so when I arrived there, I trained there like 20 years ago, and then I kind of came back around as a slight shift in career. And I started running these workshops because everyone was coming in struggling with perfectionism. I mean, you might imagine that at an Ivy League, but it's also part of the area that I live in. There's a lot of universities, there's a lot of entrepreneurship, there's a lot of business and industry. And most people that I see are really struggling in one way or another with this underlying low grade anxiety around, am I doing this right? Am I good enough? Am I an imposter? who do I think that I am that I could even attempt to do this? Oh, what if they find out about me?
Yeah.
It's a really common experience for people. And then perfectionism becomes this sort of armor, like, oh, I'm just going to get it absolutely right. And then that has its own domino effect over time.
Is it, um, where is it rooted? Is it rooted in that judgment? Is it the people pleasing? Is it, I learn, and I know probably not everybody agrees with the teachings of this book, but I found, and I didn't agree with everything as well, but I found um, the courage to be disliked. It was about the teachings of Alfred Adler, but there was a certain number of things that I'm in the gym on the treadmill, and the guy says, fear of judgment and other things, and in little things, like for example, like maybe the salesperson um not wanting to cold call, or things like that, because they have a fear of being judged on the other end, those types of things. And a couple of those things were like, man, this person's living in my head right now.
Mhm.
But is it, my point is, are some of these things just that? Are they a fear of judgment that, oh, this person, I put something out, for example, and somebody's going to judge me, or I'm going to walk into a room and I don't have the exact perfect attire on that I want. I mean, where is it?
Well, I wouldn't say it's just a fear of judgment. I would say that this is a conditioned response to
Mm,
experiences in life that may have been shaming, may have been very difficult, where people might have not gotten the validation, encouragement that they needed. And then that actually, the body remembers that. And
mm,
so, we always try to think that we can kind of like, oh, if I could just change my limiting belief, that I'm not good enough, if I could just have a flexible growth mindset, everything will be better. And I like to call BS on that because it's so rooted actually in your body. It's a fight flight response and
mm,
sometimes a freeze response. So,
yeah.
so you mentioned procrastination before, and I say, well, that's one near sister of perfectionism. And on the other side is workaholism. There's this continuum. So I think that we need to ask ourselves the question, what am I afraid of? And where does that come from? And then how can I turn towards that to go to the Adler approach is turning towards that fear or that part of yourself that is worried or afraid or ashamed. So it does take emotional courage. So you asked me about kindness before, and that's like the red thread through all of my work is we need to actually learn to cultivate that kindness for ourselves. And that is so key with people who struggle with perfectionism.
There was one other part in that book, and again, I don't know if you agree or not, or you touched on the, again, not Adler, but the subject is, he says that uh, all problems are interpersonal problems. That was kind of
Totally.
his philosophy, and
I
that
actually,
tells me
so it's
that
all
I wouldn't be
relational.
perfect if nobody
Yeah.
nobody saw what I was trying to be perfect about, right?
Right. So these early experiences come in relationship to your family, your culture, walking in the cafeteria in middle school. There's all of these contexts of, and we have this blueprint, this drive to survive, and we need other people to do that. So I often say, oh, someone will say, I had this part, it's so harsh, it's beating me up all the time. And I'll try to help them locate, like, well, when did that start for you? And we don't have to go through some big archaeological dig here, but often, oh, I've always been like this. I go, you've always been like this? Or are you in like this in every area of your life? And usually we can whittle it down to some sort of experience of um, uh, where somebody called you out on something, or you made a mistake and you felt really bad about it, or you could never get anything right, or like you could not leave the house until you dusted every shelf and knickknack in the house. So we have these experiences, and then they become embedded. And what our brain does, because our brain is really tricky, it will predict an outcome before it's actually even happening. So with perfectionists, they're already predicting an outcome of not good enough, not consciously, but the brain is predicting it, and then it's protecting you, saying, okay, wait a minute, stop here. We got to make sure that this graph is absolutely perfect. you know so
you say predicting an outcome. Would I would I be fair to say would I be fair to clarify that as an anticipated outcome, meaning that we don't know the outcome. We may be wrong, but we've already made our mind up that the
Yeah,
outcome maybe on the other side, the other person or what have you
it is
is going to be
anticipatory.
negative, correct?
Right. It's almost like a behavioral prediction model in the brain. So
Yeah.
this is how I like to describe it for people, to bring it down to like a really simple level. So one of the ways that I relax is to watch Netflix at night. In particular, I really like Korean dramas.
Hmm.
They're light, they're happy. It's not all the drama that we have in the United States, and I have to read it. So my mind actually starts to relax by reading the subtitles. But now, if any of my family members go on my Netflix account, it is all Korean or Asian dramas. You will not find the stand-up comedy or the action hero movie because that recommendation engine is already predicting what I'm going to like. And until you give it new data, until you start selecting other things, you're going to keep getting served that same thing. Now, the brain, this is very rudimentary, but the brain kind of works, and there's research on this, is that you're seeing what you believe. So what do we need to do? We actually have to give our brain and our life new experiences that are different than what we experienced in the past, right? So that's sort of how we start to work with it.
Would that include maybe getting some wins under your belt, so to speak? Because just like even if it's the little wins in your
Yeah,
work
well,
or
the little
your
wins are really important. And I think
yeah.
here's one thing that people with perfectionistic tendencies do is that they minimize the positive.
Mm.
They actually don't even remember, or they've just met that milestone or that goal. They've just checked this box off and they go forward and they don't actually stop in the moment to recognize and really nurture, like, wow, small step, really important. And they forget it. And it's all then about the anxiety of the next thing, or kind of like looking for the next achievement around the corner. So, mindfulness, as you know, is actually a really important part of the work that I help people. I call it kindfulness because you have to kind of bring this awareness to the moment, but with heart, with a kind attitude, knowing that life is hard and we need to slow ourselves down and we're not going to have all the answers. So we need to slow ourselves down. So self-compassion really is one of the, I think, major and elixirs
Yeah.
to people who are dealing with perfectionistic tendencies.
I know in the ADHD world, I've been guilty of it more times than I can remember, is we'll take, managing clients and marketing or public relations work as an example where um, I sent something out on behalf of a client and something was incorrect. I made a mistake. Um, I know I used to part of the public relations roles that we did here was like sending out email newsletters. Something as simple as click here to register or learn more,
Mhm.
and the click here didn't click, those types of things. And
Right.
then the client yells at us, you just sent this email out to 10,000 people and it doesn't work. And then you just have this dread. So how, how do we manage the need for accuracy with the challenge of perfectionism? I also like to say that I think there are some things probably do need to be perfect, like if you're an accountant or a bookkeeper.
Or a brain surgeon.
Well, exactly. So how do we how do we manage that conversation in our head where things do need to be right, but we should try not to be a perfectionist every time?
So I'm gonna go back to this idea of relationships. We need to actually cultivate a relationship with ourselves. And part of what I write about in the book is identifying your inner critic. And I sort of see them as like these sort of main archetypes: the inner judge, the inner bully, the inner neatnik, like I
Yeah.
described that I have one of those, an inner joy thief that doesn't allow you to play or relax, an inner doom scroller, the researcher is just always looking for the, next thing. And when we can identify that we have this part that is trying to I don't know, scare us into accuracy, or, or motivate us to be the best that we can, but it's doing it in a really harsh way. Like, you're not good enough if you don't get this right. We need to actually cultivate a relationship with that part of ourselves. And this is sort of, it's kind of like, it's really a paradox, because we have to look to that part that's being really mean and say, I see you. You're trying to help me. How are you trying to help me? What are you helping me to do? And when clients can start to see, oh, right, I have this inner judge and it really wants to make a good impression. And if I flub this up, I'm not going to get this job or have this thing happen that I'm looking to happen. So that is a younger part of you that has been conditioned out of fear to behave in a certain way, to try to get everything right, not make a mistake on an email or how you say a name or this sort of thing. And when you can kind of identify that that part is present, I call it your plus one. Like, it's like an inner manager. It's always coming around with you, right?
Yeah.
Especially in certain contexts, like work, right?
Yeah.
Is to say, I know that you're here and I get it because this is really important to me. But you know what? Trust me, I've got this. And if we don't do it perfectly, it's going to be okay. So we need to cultivate relationships with those parts of ourselves. And that's a lot of the work. And once people do it, they kind of get it and they're like, oh my God, my inner judge showed up. It was so loud, but I remembered, just about feeling my feet on the ground and taking a deep breath and reminding myself in the big scheme of things, this is not that big of a deal, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that we have to actually cultivate relationships with ourselves instead of trying to get rid of it, because that's what most people do. I want to get rid of this. I hate this voice.
The I know I felt this over the years and being open and transparent with people. The When I messed something up for a public relations client in past years, there was almost this feeling of uh it's hard to describe, but it's just like this person can't trust me anymore, or
Mhm.
I am now not on an equal playing field to the person that just gave me crap about messing up their work. Do you know where I'm you know what
Mhm.
I'm saying? You're just like
Mhm.
you feel less than. Is that common?
I think that's common to the human experience.
Yeah. Mm,
Yes. You were
mm,
always afraid of making mistakes and that, or that we're going to be judged in some way. And that can really activate imposter feelings like, oh, I'm a fraud. I should have known better. Who do I think I am? And again, these are inner algorithms, is another way to think about it, that, that are just brain patterns. And I often have to say to people, yeah, we have really tricky brains. It's going to remember the same thing over and over again because the brain likes to be efficient, but it's wrong. And then we need to actually insert new algorithms in there.
yeah.
And that's practice. That is literally creating tiny habits every day. Okay, so I had that exact experience that you described earlier where I sent out an email and I spelt the person's name wrong. It was like with an I instead of an E. I mean, it was a really common mistake that actually, like on your Microsoft Word, it just predicts that how you're going to spell the name. And I
Right.
spelt
Yeah.
it in the
Yeah.
other way, right? There was two ways, like Sarah with an H or Sarah with no H.
Emily or yeah.
Exactly. And then I
Yeah.
got this most scathing email back. I've been here 14 years and I was like, I've only been here two. So I'm sorry, but anyway, it was this really mean
Yeah.
email from a colleague. And so I wrote back and so I know how to write a good apology because I wrote how to do that in my first book. And I literally followed the script, right? This is actually based in science. You know, dear so and so, I am so sorry that I made this mistake. My apologies. I'll make sure it won't happen again. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, it was very nice. But then this person could not stop. Then she wrote me another email back saying, well, I'm just really surprised that this is coming from you, a person who considers themselves a writer and a good communicator. And I was like, oh, wow, this is
Mm,
interesting
yeah.
because I activated something in her, like a part in her. It has nothing to do with me. And I had to really work on that initial redness, like, that red hot feeling that you get, like,
Yeah.
oh my God.
Yeah.
And um, I had to talk about it actually with a supervisor, saying, I made this mistake, but apparently an apology wasn't good enough. And how do I cope then with my activated feelings around that and how to continue working with somebody? So these are everyday occurrences. But I am a perfectionist and I felt bad that I had spelt her name wrong. But I people get my name wrong so many times that I'm like, whatever.
Well,
You know?
take my Boston accent, for
Yeah.
example. I mean,
Yeah.
I
I
think I
love
messed it up
I'm
last
like, I've
time.
been in Boston for 30 years. Everyone says Tara. But these are little ordinary everyday mini judgments and rejections that we get. I'm sure my husband feels it for me when I come home from work and the dishes are still in the sink, and all I have to do is give him a look, you know? And so we all have to kind of work with how we judge ourselves, how we judge other people. But perfectionism in particular is a really tricky orientation to life. There is actually some heritability. There was one twin study done in Italy, and it's like about 40% heritable. So if you were raised in a family with a perfectionist or perfectionistic tendencies, there is some likelihood that you are going to have that sort of same genetic makeup. Doesn't mean that you're going to, be I don't know, the stereotypical mean perfectionist, but that you have to kind of work with that, knowing that that's part of your family or even a legacy, down the ancestral line.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. There is even busy adults with ADHD who are challenged. I guess I'd call it doom scrolling. Um, and it's interesting because I have some of these conversations with people, and people can't even really identify what they're looking for. They're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. I mean, are they looking for perfectionism? Are they looking for validation? I understand
I think
there's
they're looking
deeper
for
than that. I think the ADD wants the
unconsciously.
dopamine, but
Yeah, it's
yeah,
totally, it's that anticipation of getting something good.
yeah,
Right. So it is actually, I mean, we're all addicted in this way. And I mean, a lot of these technology tools are really good at capitalizing on that, on how the brain works. And with perfectionism, it's interesting in terms of the research. So they've been researching perfectionism over like the last 30 or 40 years, and perfectionism has been on a rise, understandably, given our culture is always about more, 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 better, better, better. But there's a spike that happens around 4 years after the first smartphone is developed. So the first smartphone comes around, I don't know, 2007, 2008. 4 years later, the spike in perfectionism goes up the chart.
yeah,
So that's not causation, but there's a really interesting correlation that people now are more exposed to, I don't know, all of these unrealistic ideals. And in the perfectionism domain, there's three types of perfectionist. One is a social sort of the would fall under the category of socially prescribed perfectionism. That's the compare and despair. It's like what you're talking about. It's the doom scrolling, seeing what other people are doing. Then you end up comparing yourself because you can't help that the mind compares. That's how we learn.
yeah,
So you and that makes you vulnerable to actually anxiety and depression. Then there's self-oriented perfectionists who really you keep moving the goalposts for yourself, right? You have really high standards for yourself. It's not even so much about other people or comparing, but you just keep wanting to do better and better. And I think that I would fall into that category because getting to college and getting a graduate degree was my way out of a chaotic childhood. So I sort of became a self-oriented um, uh, perfectionist. And then there's the other oriented perfectionist who demands excellence by everybody in their life. And those are that's like the Miranda character in The Devil Wears Prada, the
yeah.
mean boss. But all of these things overlap more or less. And most people, you're not immune from perfectionism. Put it that way in this
Right.
culture today.
ADHD or not.
Right. I think with ADHD, and I work with a lot of young people who come in, they've already self-diagnosed themselves, or they actually have a diagnosis, or they come in to get a diagnosis. And and it's really hard in our attention economy, to kind of tease some things out. But I work with actually a number of women who are diagnosed with ADHD or ADD, let's say, and their perfectionism is really amplified, in part because the expectation for girls and women to be smart, to be quiet, to be good
Yep.
is
Yeah.
really high. And so then there's this other layer. And so often their attentional difficulties don't even get recognized until later in life. Um, and and then we have to work on that. So I do a lot of parts work. Oh, there's a part of you that feels like it needs to get everything right. Let's work with this part. Let's work with connecting with this part, because you really have to work with the tension that's associated with perfectionism. There's a lot of tension.
Well, yeah, and this is maybe a completely other conversation, but and I've said this numerous times to the point where people are probably tired of hearing it, but you get on social media and you see these very simplistic views, whether it's people writing things or a graphic or what have you. We see these very simplistic views of burnout, um, where it's just, oh, you work too much, or your workload's too much, or take regular breaks.
Hmm.
Go eat
Yeah.
lunch, go drink a bottle of water. But there, I could think of a dozen other reasons why somebody would be burnt out, and the internal pressure, perfectionism being one of them, is is high on my list, right? Would that is that fair to say?
Yes, I mean, burnout really is, I like to see it as some of the more classic definitions, like it's a person job mismatch sometimes, and it
Yeah,
doesn't actually really promote a person's best talent or skills because you have to fit into some sort of system that's not conducive, and then it just, you get demoralized, you feel like you're not of value and those sorts of things. I think with perfectionistic tendencies and trying to, the idea of trying to achieve a certain goal or get things just right or being a people pleaser, um, it backfires after a while, right? Because your efforts don't actually end up giving you the returns that you want. And in fact, there is research that shows that there's like this point of diminishing returns, let's say, is that so all that striving, that effort is going to serve you to a point. And then there's a point where it doesn't serve you because you're not adding any more value to what it is
yeah,
that you're working on, right? And so you have to kind of, that's where the 80-20 rule is actually helpful for perfectionists. It's like, you know what? Do your 80% because it's going to be somebody else's 150%,
yeah.
And, to kind of take a step back and take a bigger picture. But I think what happens is people have a hard time taking the bigger picture, like say sending out like an email that had a link that didn't click. I love it when I see newsletters come back and saying, oops, correction, because it's like that's so human, you
Yeah.
know.
I just hope the person didn't get yelled at for
They
and the
might have,
boss of
but
the
you know what?
client said,
The
send
likelihood
this
that
out and
somebody
throw
read
yourself
the
under the
email.
bus. Yeah. So as I've always said to you is in others is that I really want somebody listening to be able to put some type of thought into action when they
Yes.
listen to this podcast. Um, we can talk about a topic, we can get to a point where people understand and relate to a certain thing, obviously perfectionism here. But do you have some type of uh, blueprint or methodology in the book that allows people to, I won't say like 1000% get rid of perfectionism, but just start the process of understanding themselves and then uh, try to implement the things needed to become less of a perfectionist? Can you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the Perfectionist Dilemma book, I spell out an entire method. That's what the book is. It has six
Mm,
steps. The acronym is EVOLVE. And I walk people through what each of those steps are. And with each of those steps, there's these happy achiever tools, right? To go back to your question of like, well, what can you do? And in the beginning, it's just really being aware of, you know, what is happening, and even identifying that you have these inner critical parts or that you have this perfectionist tendency, and as being aware. And this is where the grounding practices are really important. Um, And so I just have like a chock full of skills. But I do say, like, even if you never read the book and you identify as a perfectionist, I would just say perfectionism is protection. What are you protecting yourself from? Can you give yourself a little bit more kindness and go a little slower? Slow down. Take things one step at a time. And then at the end of the day, do this inventory of those small wins, to use your term from before. Is like, what went well today? And there is always something, and it doesn't have to be something major or big. Because I want to go back to that sort of that Netflix brain metaphor, is you
Yeah.
need to actually do new things to give your brain different information, but the brain will take that information in when it's calm, not when it's anxious. So a lot of the happy achiever tools are really kind of, helping. I do a lot of teaching around the nervous system and seeing where people's nervous systems are. And many perfectionists have habituated to such a high level of stress, like cortisol just spewing through their bodies, that when they do start to slow down, their body says, "Oh my gosh, David's slowing down, something's going wrong, alarm bells," and then you go back to the hamster wheel
Yeah.
because you're used to it. So I have this method. I know we don't have time today to spell it out. I would refer people actually to the Perfectionist Dilemma website, the book website, because you can just download free Happy Achiever tools. I have a workbook in there and I have some
Cool. I'm going to do
videos,
that. Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
As we wrap up, somebody buys the book, The Perfectionist Dilemma. They read it. Is there something in the book that may surprise people about the topic of perfectionism?
Yes. And I would say it's in the first chapter where I say perfectionism is not your fault.
Hmm. You heard it, folks.
It's not your
Cool.
fault.
All right. So the website is the same as the book, correct?
Yes, it's the perfectionistdilemma.com. You can probably just put it into Google or go to my website, taracousineau.com, and you'll find it there. And I am starting something new on Substack called The Peaceful Perfectionist, because
Oh,
I
cool.
wanted to find a place where I could kind of like what you're doing with your podcast, is kind of write and talk about it and cultivate a community for people who identify as perfectionists. And yeah, we're all in it together.
Yeah. Cool. We'll have that link as well because some people like to read, some people like to listen, some people like to do both.
Exactly.
So awesome. All right, cool. All right, folks. If hopefully you've gained some understanding of your perfectionism and have been able to maybe think about what you can do next. If you really need to tackle this, I highly recommend getting the book and, of course, The Kindness Cure. So, because that is an awesome book, and many of us beat ourselves up, and it doesn't have to be that way. So, as I say, welcome back anytime. We always have great discussions here, and we could
Yeah.
go on forever. I know people's attention spans in this community don't last long, so